Hi everyone, my name's Kate Casey and I'm the Learning Environment Systems Administrator for James Cook University and I work off the Townsville campus. And I'm here to talk to you today about a few of the challenges that we were presented with and some of the lessons that we learned in the process of transitioning our 9.1 system into SaaS with Ultra at navigation level and also with some subjects at Ultra level. So I'd like to help you minimize your panic to a certain degree and also tell you all of the things that I wish someone had told me 18 months ago. Well, that I can jam into 25 minutes anyway. So Danny has already talked a bit about this in the keynote this morning. So I think probably most of you were there for that. So you've got a bit of a good understanding around the work that we were doing to produce our JCU Online parallel environment. So that environment was SaaS. It had Ultra enabled at system level, and we also had the Ultra experience enabled on set subjects that were being taught as part of the nursing and data science courses. So that was done and was live by October 2017. And it was interesting because we'd actually started this process in April of that year. So it was a very quick turnaround and a bit of a white knuckle ride in places. But we had that parallel environment live. We then had to do some SIS integration changes in order to support that. We also had to replace our institutional readings tool because we used to use Concord Masterfile, which a few of you might remember from being somewhat archaic. And because of the changes to SaaS and issues with building blocks, we were not able to use that anymore. In addition to that, we had a change in authentication methodology. We had a DNS change. And we changed the way that we did our login page. And that was all done by the start of December so that it was ready to support our migration in the middle of December. And that was done to take our whole existing 9.1 instance, which was the original instance, up to SaaS. So basically, what we then had was we had two live environments, both of which were SaaS, and we merged those two together by bringing the courses across from the standalone JCU Online environment into the Learn.jcu main environment. So that was kind of the technical component of that transition. On top of that, we have had the Transform project running in parallel, which is run by our Transformations Educational Design team to support our academics. And as a result of that, in semester 2 of 2018, so right now, we have around 70 Ultra sites that are live, and we'll be putting another 250-ish live for the start of 2019. The main thing we learnt from this process was that having a parallel environment in SaaS was the best way we could possibly learn about what SaaS was like and particularly learn about what Ultra was like because it was real. There was real students in there doing things. We were getting real feedback from academics and that made all the difference for us. It gave us a place to play and learn and experiment and that was so helpful when it came time in December to do the real migration. So we planned for the change in great detail. There was a lot of stakeholder negotiations that went on. Our domestic campuses run on a semester basis, but our Singapore campus and our Brisbane campus run on a trimester basis. So trying to find a slot when everybody wasn't in the middle of exams and wasn't doing key assessments, that sort of thing, was quite critical to making this process work. We also had to be aware of the roles that different people in our team would have to play and those dependencies, as well as the system changes that we would be making and making sure that any interdependencies between system modifications, integration changes, those kind of things were all working correctly so we weren't sort of falling over ourselves. We also made sure that we did a very good technical and functional comparison between how 9.1, our existing 9.1 instance worked, and how similar things worked in SaaS, and also the functionality that was available in original courses versus what was available in Ultra courses. So we really had to know what was going to work, what wasn't going to work, what workarounds we could use to get us over the line. So that was a really critical piece of work that we did as a large team. And then we had to prioritise that list to make sure that the planning we were doing was going to end up where we wanted it to be. And as a result of that piece of analysis work, we then built the cutover. And that cutover was not just for my team, for the Learn team, that was also for ICT staff who were making development, doing development for us and making technical changes. And also it was in conjunction with Blackboard's cutover, because we all had to be aware that when the system went down, we were doing this, our SDM was doing that, our developer had to turn SIS off. There was a bunch of different processes that had to align. And then we made the change. So there was a lot of pre-migration communications that went on. And this is pretty much the same with any upgrade any of you have ever done. It's a case of making sure everyone knows what's happening and when it's happening and everyone's informed about the outages. In this instance, we had to tell people a little bit of extra information because it was going to be an extended outage. Plus, when they logged back into learn.jcu again, it wasn't really going to look like anything they'd ever seen before. So they had to be aware that there were changes coming. Our downtime was actually 94 hours. Now, don't freak out about that, because this was a very complex change that probably had a lot more elements in it than any migration many of you will ever do. We were changing, because we knew we were going to be having an outage anyway, we put a lot of items in there. So we ended up having this very long change process, and a lot of different things changed as well as Learn. I would expect that it would be a lot less for many of you, but again, that's something that you would figure out in testing. So once we'd actually handed the system over to Blackboard and they had done their work to do the migration, they handed it back to us and we went through our standard post-upgrade processes that we always do. So the system configuration, checking LTIs are still working, making sure auth is still working. Mobile app configuration, integration configuration, and we had to do a bit of a cleanup there because we turned our SIS integration off before the actual migration happened, so that we didn't have random people's changes getting lost and then suddenly people weren't enrolled in the right subjects. So before we brought the system back up, we had to turn the SIS integration back on so that it would go through and process all of those changes. And while we were doing all of that, our support team were doing sanity testing in parallel, making sure buttons worked, making sure they could submit assessment, just the normal sanity testing that you would go through in the space of any upgrade. Then we reviewed the change. So we've received feedback from a lot of different people in a lot of different ways, both formally and informally. So that's largely in the user space. I've done a bit of a debrief with our ICT staff, and we've also had some improvement discussions, particularly around our integrations and how that can be better in future. We've collaborated with Blackboard extensively for continuous improvement as we go. And from this, and from our own internal reviewing, we learnt some lessons and we found some gotchas. So the new tech stack is quite interesting. I've put up an image here which kind of has way too much information to go through now. But I got really sick of going to meetings and different people kept using different terminology, and I'd be sitting there going, no, that's not right at all. So I ended up drawing on my whiteboard next to my desk this. And then in the end, my terrible handwriting was so awful I couldn't stand it anymore, so I turned it into something much more formal. But this gives you an idea of what's actually happened at a stack level change between what we used to have in 9.1 and what we have now with SaaS and Ultra. And I kind of split it up into what the back-end changes were, what the front-end changes were, and what the app changes were. And I'll just quickly run through a couple of definitions because some of you in the room may kind of not be on SaaS or Ultra yet, and this might make a bit more sense to you. So SaaS is what's happening under the hood. It used to be 9.1. It's the actual application version itself. And it's also, to a certain degree, the paradigm of the application. Ultra at navigation level is just that sort of skin change that when you log in, it's very black and white and you have all the navigation options down the left-hand side. And lastly, the Ultra experience at course level versus the original experience gives you that different look and feel for courses and also the different functionality in courses. So there's actually kind of 3 levels there, and they are somewhat dependent because you can't have Ultra navigation without SaaS, and you can't have Ultra at course level without Ultra navigation. So you really need to make sure that you're doing that process in the right order. And also coming out of this, because we were having such extensive terminology change and stack change, it was super important that we got our communications right, and they went to the right people at the right time, and they had the right information. That was a really key thing in part of this process. So my first takeaway from this is that mass scale terminology change is very confusing, and you have to communicate this really well. And in my experience, your communications must be unambiguous, and you can use graphics to help. That's something that we did a lot when we were generating news articles to provide to our users, screenshots of things, information about what we were doing. Continuous delivery has been a big change for us, and it's been a good change, but it has been a bit of a difficult change to adjust to. Many of you, as we were, would be used to the traditional 10-week cycle where you get your staging environment refreshed, you get the latest version in there, and then you've got a few weeks to test. Continuous delivery is every 4 weeks it happens, whether you like it or not, and this is a challenge with a small team. We also had a couple of issues with release notes being provided to us quite late. This has certainly improved since we went to SaaS, but it is something to be aware of. And additionally, we had noticed that there were a few issues arising after these upgrades. And the problem is you have to take the upgrade, you sort of don't have a choice in the matter. So that made things a bit more complicated as well. Again, that has dramatically improved since we went live, but we did have a few issues where, Friday afternoon students could access their content, and Monday morning, because our safe HTML filters had been blatted, suddenly all the script tag sources were no longer available and people couldn't access certain pieces of their content. So that was a little bit of a challenge for us, but hopefully that's mostly sorted out now. My second takeaway from that is to follow Blackboard's release notes page. There is a page that tells you all the information about what's coming and when, and at the bottom, you can actually go and put your email address in and subscribe to that, and it'll tell you when anything changes. You need to prioritize your testing for the stuff that's most important and the stuff that's most complex, particularly when you've got a small team of people. It helps if you can determine when the upgrade will occur. Many of you who are on managed hosting will remember the lovely emails that say, hey, your system's down and hey, it's coming back up. That's not a thing in SaaS. So it's really important that you can kind of work with that and figure out when it's going to be. We've actually written an alert that touches the system version REST API endpoint, and that means that we actually can check against what's coming down the line versus what we have right now. And lastly, if you do see that weird things are happening after your upgrades, compile a checklist. And we did this, and we just make sure we go through it after every upgrade. Okay, implementing terms was another challenge for us because we really, really wanted to use the lovely new courses page functionality for students. But if you don't use terms, which we didn't, so we had to bring that in, and also if you don't structure your terms correctly, this can be a real challenge. In addition to that, you have to make sure that your course availability and duration is also configured correctly. The design for that was really crucial to make it straightforward for students to figure out where are my subjects right now, what am I looking at in the future, what's in the past. And we also had a few challenges because at JCU, we keep all of our content accessible for students for 6 years, and that is currently not possible with the way that the courses page works at the moment. So any of our 6th year medical students who are on prac who want to go back and see stuff they did in 2nd year were not able to because they were actually beyond the end of that term. So there is a bit of a nasty database workaround for that we annoy Blackboard for every so often, but that's something to be aware of if your institution expects students to be able to see old stuff they've done in the past. So my third takeaway from that is decide early about your terms and how you're going to implement them. And be aware of students who are studying outside the normal semester zones. And for us, that's our students who are studying in that third study period that goes over Christmas, so our Singapore and Brisbane students. If you name them really well, you'll help prevent confusion and also get them into your SIS integration, because managing this stuff manually is awful. Managing anything manually is awful, but terms are particularly difficult to deal with. And also, as I said before, be aware of past course access limitations. So the integration slide, lots of fun. SOAP doesn't work anymore. Be careful with that one and test it. We had a hidden piece of SOAP we didn't know about until the very last minute, which was rather exciting. If you're developing in REST, which many of you will be, and I think probably a lot of you would have been at DevCon this year and seen some of the exciting work that's going on there. Mark was talking a lot about what happens with REST query limits. They are set to 10,000 by default, which is basically for development state. So it's really important that if you're using them for production, you get that raised as soon as possible. JSHacks right now doesn't work on Ultra sites, but it does work on original sites in SaaS. So that's really good. I've actually got some JSHacks running on original sites right now, but not on Ultra. There are some building block compatibility issues, and that's one of the reasons that we had to ditch our old reading list tool and go to Talus. And additionally, a lot of you, like us, will use the OSCELOT Basic LTI building block. That it's not formally supported, shall I say. Bits and pieces of it do still work, but you need to be really careful with it, and it's not supported. So things like that can be an issue, and they can be a real showstopper if you're using that for mission-critical stuff. And lastly, native LTI placements are a little bit different in Ultra and Original, and you really need to play with that and experiment and see what it looks like. And again, the DevCon people will kind of heard about that because we had a discussion about it on Monday. Fourth takeaway, check and double check for SOAP. It hides. It's really important that you don't have any of that stuff hanging around. Get your REST query limit bumped for production, and test all of your building blocks really early. So if there's something that runs the whole institution and you don't find out until 2 days before you go live, it's going to be a real pain point for you. And additionally, map out your LTI placements and figure out how that's going to work early. Managing a hybrid site model has been exciting for us. A hybrid site, I term, is when you are deploying both original experience sites and Ultra experience sites. In order to get around some of the anxiety associated with this, we have implemented copies of original courses that we call preview sites that we then turn on Ultra preview in, and you have to make Instructor Choice mode if you're going to be doing that. That has really helped us because it means that lecturers don't need to kind of start from base level and build all of their content in Ultra from scratch. They can have an idea. There's a really good report provided of what stuff's going to go across from their original site to their Ultra site. And in that way, people can say, oh, I know that this is going to work, or I know this isn't going to work, and it really helps them with that. Plus, it means that they can actually copy content from those sites into their real Ultra site. So again, it's sort of preventing that extra work having to be done by lecturers. There are some implications here for automated management of sites, particularly when you do a bulk rollover at the end of the year, because obviously if you have original sites and then you convert them to Ultra and then you want to go to the next year, you don't want them to be created as original sites again. So we've actually got a piece of bespoke middleware that we're developing right now that manages those records for us and ensures that that process works seamlessly, because prior to that I had a very large spreadsheet. It's not good. No one wants to do that. So my takeaway from that is to consider the methods for automatic site management and also automatic workflow management, and plan any of the integration changes really early, and in partnership with your developers. They will thank you for it. And lastly, we redesigned the authentication path and the Learn gateway. So we changed a bunch of DNS CNAMES. We changed LDAP to SAML, which meant we were using our institutional authentication. And we also changed the 2016 theme and turned on Ultra navigation, which can be a bit of a dangerous process. Test that one, because once you've done it, you can't go back. And lastly, there are no modules on the login page. So you need to consider how you're going to provide advice to your users and alerts and news. So my takeaways from those are test your entry points, make sure that your desktop and mobile auth is working the way you expected, test switching on Ultra Nav because it's irreversible, and think about any content that you previously deployed via modules and how that can now be managed. And I've got a few options there you might want to think about. We ended up going with the standalone gateway. So lastly, your survival strategy, in my experience, only needs 6 things. You need a really good knowledge base to be able to understand what you're doing and to build a really good cutover plan. You need really good user communications to support the change that you're going to make and to support people's understanding. You need really, really good colleagues, including your SDM. I cannot highlight how important that is. You need really good caffeine because you will be tired. And you need a great sense of humour, again, because you will probably be tired. Does anyone have any questions? I'm happy to answer questions now, or you can send me an email or catch up with me at the conference. Thank you very much for your time.